It started October 7th in a horrific massacre, but it continues now in the Gaza Strip, in the north of Israel, and potentially in Judea and Samaria and other places. It is intense. It is also global. It's a global game that's happening here as well. Let's take a little look at a kind of intro of what has led to this moment and what we're facing today. Israel is still reeling from the news that many fighters were killed, Israeli fighters, Jewish fighters were killed yet last night in the Gaza Strip. Different reports coming in. Right now, the count is at 15 Israeli fighters, including a part of a unit of the Sayeret Givati, the Givati Special Recon Unit, and tank brigades have been hit. And this is a war. And our leaders have warned us that this is going to be a war with costs. They want to eliminate Hamas at all costs, and all costs means that we are indeed paying a cost. Is it a right cost? That is also being debated here in Israel. Should Israel go in with infantry and with tanks, or should we wait until artillery and air force are done? And we have many forces that are part of the fight, including 80 tons of deliveries from the United States that have arrived. I'm not talking about the United States's forces that have arrived and their armaments. I'm talking about just donations that have come from American Jews and pro-Israel, lovers of Israel, non-Jews, Christians, etc. Have sent just from the United States 80 tons worth of stuff. So we have a lot of fighting that we're doing. That word "fighting" reminds me of a slogan by one of my heroes, which is Colonel Richard Kemp. He always says, keep attacking. And Richard Kemp has spent most of his life fighting terrorism and insurgency, commanding British troops as a British officer in the world's hotspots, including Afghanistan, Iraq, the Balkans, and Northern Ireland. He's now a writer, a journalist, media commentator, speaker, and also strategic consultancy. And he's also somebody who's fought for Israel in the past and for proving Israel's military's morality, and I'm not surprised that a man who has been in hotspots before is now back in the Middle East, back in Israel, in the hotspot once again. Richard Kemp, shalom and welcome.
Thank you very much, Yishai. I'm just disappointed you haven't introduced me by my Hebrew name, which you gave me, Avner, last time I was in Hebron with you. And
that's right. That's right. That's right. That's your nom de guerre. That's your nom de guerre is Avner. That's right, Colonel Kemp.
Even though I'm a goy, I still have a Hebrew name.
That's right. That's right. That's a good one, and it was King David's general. Okay, you could be sitting on a couch in southern UK, but instead you are here. Why?
Well, this is a fight that not just for Israel. This is a fight for world civilization, and if I can be of some assistance here, then this is the place I need to be. And I always believe that if you're going to be commenting or advising or saying anything about a war, you've got to be somewhere close to where the action's taking place. And of course, anyone can sit around in Britain looking at the internet and watching the television and all that stuff. But I think there's no substitute for actually getting a feel for the place and the action. And in the last 3 weeks, I arrived here on Monday of 3 weeks ago, and since then I've been around the borders of Gaza and around the borders of Lebanon, talking to IDF commanders and IDF soldiers on the ground, preparing in the case of Gaza to go in the case of Lebanon to defend against Hezbollah and potentially go in there as well.
Okay. And let's go back. You've been here for 3 weeks, so let's go back to basically what happened This Sabbath will mark a month since it all began. I don't want people to misunderstand what I'm saying, but I have this, and maybe you share this with me, an internal will to respect my enemy. I don't like to just minimize them, and I like to think of my enemy as cunning, smart, and serious, so that I take him seriously. I think that Hamas executed a brilliant strike against Israel, wreaking unbelievable psychological, emotional, physical havoc, burning buildings, and destroying families, etc. First thing, what's your assessment of Hamas's attack, and what do you think their real goal is? I mean, it clearly wasn't a strike to destroy Israel. We had a colleague of ours, Mordechai Kedar, Dr. Kedar, on the show here. He posited that Hamas jumped the gun, unlike what Iran actually wanted. But from your point of view, give me, just before we talk about the horrors and how awful it was, how do you assess the strike against Israel?
Yeah, I think you can, let's say you can recognize the success of your enemy, even if you despise them wholeheartedly, as I do, certainly. But, you know, as you've kind of mentioned, Mordecai Kedar and his assessment of that, I'm sure he recognizes, as most people recognize, that this was not a Hamas operation 3 weeks ago. This was not, I've watched to certain journalists and diplomats, and I think today even members of Knesset, footage that has not been seen by most people, which is absolutely horrific.
You saw that presentation?
I saw that a few days ago, and it's
how bad was it, Richard?
Incredibly bad. I mean, I've seen some very nasty and unpleasant things in real life, in the flesh, in different battlefields, but I've never seen anything quite as awful as that. And I don't need to go through all the details of it, but one thing that struck me was the way in which what appeared to be a well-organized, well-disciplined, well-prepared military force went against a load of civilians. And if you direct a military force against civilians, then it can only be an utter catastrophe. And that struck me very strongly. These are not people who were trained in the Gaza Strip. These are not just Hamas. This is Iran. This is training by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to organize them, to equip them, to teach them how to fight in the way they did. And that's the product. And the plan was very successful. The plan surprised the IDF, and I think it surprised Hamas as well. I think they got much more success than they could ever have dreamt of, and I think more success than most of us would have dreamt of. But their plan, you rightly say, their plan is not, and their intention is not to defeat Israel or the IDF. They know they can't do that. No matter how well organized, trained, and armed they are, they cannot do that. Yes, they scored a victory then, but they're not going to win ultimately. And I think that their objective was what their objective always is, which is to entice Israel to carry out counteraction in the way that it's been doing for the last 3 weeks, to carry out airstrikes and ground operations in order to kill their civilians. The objective of that, of course, is to invite world vilification, hatred of Israel, to get other people to join in, like Hezbollah in the north, like the Houthis in Yemen, like militias in Syria, and other jihadists to join the fight, not just the fight in Israel, but the fight against Jews all around the world, as we've been seeing on university campuses and elsewhere. That's their objective and their plan, and it works like a dream every time, because the sucker media, the sucker United Nations, actually the sucker is probably the wrong word, because I think there's malignant intent there as well. Every single time they form part of the cycle of violence which encourages Hamas to do it again and again.
Colonel Kemp, you are a British patriot, and yet I saw over the Thames tens of thousands, maybe it was hundreds of thousands. It looked huge pro-Hamas, so-called pro-Palestine rally, but really was really not a pro-Palestine rally. It was an anti-Israel, pro-Hamas rally with no apology made for the heinous attack on Israeli citizenry and the destruction of civilian life, etc. The murder of kids at a music concert. So you mentioned this. I wasn't even going to go here, but okay, you have this international force against Israel. One of its main heads is in the UK. So I just, as a British citizen, I want to ask you, how do you understand it all? How do you deal with it? How do you understand your own country in light of that? And let's be real here. Let's be frank.
Yeah, let's be totally frank. You're absolutely right. And just to start off with, there are 3 prominent Hamas leaders living in the UK with UK passports, living in UK houses in London, known to the authorities, been there for years, photographed with some of the Hamas leaders in Gaza in the past. These are at large in the UK now, part of a prescribed terrorist organization. It's prescribed or designated in the UK as such. But this whole artifice, the whole of the what led to the demonstrations, the protests, this is the result of decades of anti-Israel propaganda. This is not pro-Palestinian stuff. This is anti-Israel stuff. It's been built up over many, many years, not just in the UK, in other European countries, in the United States and elsewhere. And the premise of it, the whole premise of it, which makes it very hard to defeat, is the fact that you, Israel, you're an illegitimate country. You've stolen Palestinian land. You have illegal settlements. You have illegal occupation. You have an apartheid state. All of this whole narrative has been embedded in the Western world for decades. And whatever happens to you, okay, I think probably any decent person, almost any decent person, would see the horrible events of 3 weeks ago as absolutely beyond description, beyond anything really that we've seen probably since either the heyday of the Islamic State or even going back to the Holocaust. But that doesn't matter because you had it coming. This was what you brought on yourselves by your horrific settler colonialist policies, and that is the narrative. And it's, you can talk to people about raping girls and beheading babies and murdering people and dragging people off into captivity in Gaza, but none of that matters because you're in the wrong, and that's right. Where it all comes from.
On a technical level, I call what you just talked about, I call that the occupation accusation. And I say that if students do not know how to answer the occupation accusation claims, then they are disarmed. Israel's got to know how to answer that. And the answer is not that we're a really good country that makes cherry tomatoes and has gay rights and even sends its planes to help places that have faced earthquakes. Those are not answers to the occupation accusations. You must make it clear that we have a right to this land. This is our land. Sadly, our government has allowed this narrative to flourish around the world by not speaking very clearly. Okay, so we covered the physical, the beginnings of the war. We covered also the international response, and you pointed out the importance of what I call the narrative war, the narrative that basically posits that Israel is in the wrong in the first place. Now let's talk about how the war is going. It's been a month. Israel decided to strike back. Israel has identified its goal as destroying Hamas. I haven't heard it clearly said or stated that the goal is to fight Iran or to fight jihadism in Israel or around the world, but specifically to deal with this, organization and to destroy it utterly. Even the conquest or retaking of or recapturing or resettling Gaza has not been discussed, clearly has not been stated as a goal. So tell me about what you think of Israel's goals and how it's been doing so far in your military estimation.
Well, I think Israel's goal is relatively clear, which is twofold. One of which is to clear Gaza of armed terrorist groups. That includes Hamas, it includes Islamic Jihad, it includes the other gangsters there as well. And that's a pretty well clear and defined objective. Now, that does not mean that you eradicate Hamas entirely around the world. It may mean that you kill most of them in Gaza. It may mean some of the others escape to fight another day. We don't know that, but it means basically eradicating that problem. And the second goal, of course, which the Prime Minister and others have made very clear, is a very important one, is to rescue the hostages, get them back, which is in itself one of the most demanding challenges that the IDF face, probably that they've ever faced. And I think beyond that, there's obviously questions as to what happens to Gaza afterwards. We can discuss if you want. But beyond that, we must never forget that up in the north, there are something like 150,000 missiles and UAVs controlled by Iran, operated by Lebanese Hezbollah, another proxy of Iran like Hamas and like Islamic Jihad, waiting to be unleashed. Now, the big question is whether or not they will be unleashed by Iran. Obviously, we've seen quite a lot of action up there already in lower level attacks by both Hezbollah and Hamas from Lebanon. But we may see a much more concerted attack if Iran decides the time is right for that. And Israel will obviously have to respond to that. And it may be, I might, for example, argue, and no reason why anyone should listen to me, but I would argue, I think, that should be dealt with anyway. Even if there is not a concerted attack from the north, it cannot be allowed to continue to exist after what happened 3 weeks ago. We cannot allow that. The place I'm staying in now in Tel Aviv is full of refugees from Kiryat Shimona. I've been up there in Kiryat Shimona and other places close to the border. The people are terrified, not so much of the rockets, or they should be, but of the potential for Hamas or Hezbollah coming across the border as Hamas did 3 weeks ago. So that has to be dealt with, I would argue, as soon as possible. On top of that, of course, there's the potential for even greater flare-ups in Judea and Samaria and inside, let's say, Israel proper, for want of a better word, as we've seen repeatedly. And so, the IDF's got a great deal of challenges on its hands, a huge amount of challenges. As to how it's going so far, very briefly, none of us really know much about what's happening, and that's a good thing. It's absolutely right that we should be in the dark about what the IDF is doing inside Gaza. Operational security dictates that. But from what I've been able to understand, the IDF has been making some pretty good progress inside Gaza. They've been in the tunnels, they've been destroying tunnels, they've been killing quite a large number of significant Hamas commanders and fighters, destroying rocket launchers and anti-tank missile systems. So obviously it's potentially quite a long process, but from what I can see so far, we've tragically seen, as you mentioned earlier, the loss of a number of IDF soldiers already, and unfortunately we're likely to see more. But as long as it continues on course as it is now, and as long as the United States does not try and restrain Israel from prosecuting this attack to the end, I think we're going to see a successful operation inside Gaza.
Okay, so I'm trying to decide what we should go to next, but Lou, one of the producers of the show, writes, please discuss the attack from Syria and the Houthis as well. So he's trying to understand what are the other kind of players around us, because I mean, this was a news item that I saw yesterday, which was an unusual headline. It said, Yemen declares war on Israel. I was like, Yemen declares war on Israel? I was like, what's going on here? But obviously we're living in a new Middle East where Yemen is now a Iranian stronghold. And guess what? The noose around Saudi Arabia is tighter, and the Iranian machine keeps going. Now they have yet another stronghold of their ideology and their firepower. So let's talk a little bit just about that. And maybe within that question, I'll ask the follow-up question that I wanted to ask, which is, okay, what are the Americans doing here? Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? They've brought in tremendous firepower, equal to most states, the amount of firepower that they've brought. Is that a good thing? So those are my two questions about Yemen and about America.
Right. Well, as you rightly say, Yemen and the Houthis in Yemen are an Iranian proxy. And of course, they're going to declare war on Israel. And a few days ago, they fired a number of drones and ballistic missiles towards Israel, which were intercepted by US warships in the Red Sea. And since then, they fired more, which have been intercepted by Israel. And Israel now has missile vessels in the Red Sea itself to help defend. None of those missiles came close to Israeli territory, although they were aimed at that. And that's, of course, not the first time. We have seen in the past, we've seen missiles fired or drones fired from Yemen towards Israel. As we've seen Iranian proxies in Yemen attacking Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So this is not really, I don't think, a surprise. I don't think it's a massive challenge because I think Israel has the capability of repelling anything that Yemen can throw at it. Then, of course, you mentioned Syria as well. And there are significant Iranian proxies inside Syria, which have been pushed forward with a view to try and attacking Israel. Attempts to fire rockets at Israel from Syria have occurred. Israel has been bombing Syrian airfields in Damascus and I think Aleppo in the last few days. And of course, we know that Iran has been trying to develop a base of operations against Israel in Syria for several years, which Israel has been striking probably almost once a week for a long time. So this is the reality of what Iran calls its axis of resistance. Its proxies all around the region, directed at different countries, different allies of the US, but in particular directed at Israel. And your second question was about the US presence. I think the US
let's give we're talking about 2 carrier groups and then another Marine group is here. I've also heard rumors and I've seen some pictures that the Delta Force is here. Special forces are operating inside of Gaza already, supposedly without weapons and just advising, but who believes that? And so, there's other players here. I have a very good source who told me that tons of equipment, U.S. equipment is heading here right now in terms of rearmament for Israel. And so just everything from 5.56 bullets of M16 bullets, things like that are running short and there needs to be a resupply. That's happening. Okay, so on the one hand, we're talking about a huge arsenal, probably also including nuclear umbrella as well, that has arrived here. At the same time, there's a sense that President Biden, who gave a great speech on the one hand, is also somebody who's already starting to hint through Anthony Blinken and himself that he wants a 2-state solution. There's talk about re-empowering the PA and other solutions, including, what did I hear now? Saudi takeover of the Gaza Strip, a multinational takeover of the Gaza Strip. And we also know that President Biden, along with his predecessor, President Obama, were close to the Iranian regime, tried to make deals with them, tried to loosen succeeded in loosening what do we call the regime? When they block them from getting money, what's that called? I forgot the name, Richard. What's it called? Sanctions regime. That's right. Thank you. Undid the sanctions regime, allowed them to go towards a nuclear bomb, released $250 billion, maybe on even pallets of cash. Who knows? We're talking about people that have wanted the Iranians to come out of the little jail that they were in, have empowered them, and are now calling for a 2-state solution. On the other hand, here they are defending Israel, rearming Israel. How are we to understand the presence of the U.S. superpower on our shores here?
Very simple question. I think very simple situation. I mean, the first thing I would say is that in the same way as I believe that President Biden's foreign policy has been responsible for Russia invading Ukraine. In other words, the disgraceful and humiliating withdrawal of the US and NATO from Afghanistan. I think that empowered Putin and encouraged Putin to invade Ukraine. In the same way as that happened, I think I would lay at the door of the US foreign policy decision makers what's happening over here now. Because we as you rightly laid out just then, we've seen years going back to the Obama administration and taken up again with the Biden administration. We've seen years of appeasement of Iran, encouragement of Iran, funding of Iran, allowing Iran to develop its nuclear weapons program, albeit pretending we're not doing that, but we are doing that. And then I think, more up to date than any of those things, we've seen the distancing of President Biden from the Israeli government, refusing to allow Prime Minister Netanyahu to be invited to the White House. These things, which I think all of them, when you put them together, encouraged and emboldened Iran to do what it's done now. So, I think that a lot of the blame for what's happened, obviously the blame is with Iran and with the terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, but I think a lot of culpability has to lie with the current US administration. But now they realize what they've done, I think, and they're absolutely terrified that they've let the genie out of the bottle here and have sent these massive forces to the region to try and contain it. And you mentioned the carrier strike group in the Eastern Mediterranean. The purpose of that is to deter Hezbollah from attacking Israel. I don't know how big a deterrent that is. I mean, I question whether that would actually be used. And if I question it, then I suspect Nasrallah questions it as well. And then there's the other carrier strike group, the Eisenhower carrier strike group, that is now directly threatening in the Gulf, directly threatening Iran in case it decides to either unleash Hezbollah or carry out some other form of intervention. So these things exist as deterrents. As far as US forces inside Gaza, I would take that with a bit of a pinch of salt, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if there aren't US special forces and British special forces here to do what they can to help the IDF in rescuing the hostages, if nothing else. And I think that would be an important contribution, and that using their expertise to help. But let's not forget, one comment I would make on all this is I don't believe the US should use its military force unless Israel is in a real struggle that it can't deal with. Because I think it's so important for Israel's regional deterrence and credibility that Israel is seen to fight its own war here, not rely on Big Brother from the US. But the final thing I'd say, we mentioned allied forces. We have Chinese warships in the region. We have Russian aerial surveillance and attack aircraft on 24/7 patrol in the region as well. So there are all the ingredients, and let's not even, I won't even mention them, but let's not forget Turkey and its stance on this. But I think we've got all the ingredients for something getting really out of hand here. I hope it doesn't. I'm not suggesting it's going to, but there is the potential for a much wider conflict, I think, in this region.
Okay, let's take a little bit of let's take a view of a video together just for a second of Israeli operations inside of Gaza, what it's looking like. What does that look like to you, Colonel Kemp? Does it look like Afghanistan, Iraq, Northern Ireland? What does that remind you of?
Reminds me a bit of Gaza, actually, to be honest, Yishai. But no, it's the same thing. I mean, I mentioned before, I've spoken to a lot of these troops getting ready to go into action, including some of the ones that you will have seen in that footage in the last few days. And what I would say is talking to them is inspirational. These young men, and in many cases old men who are reservists called up to fight as well. They are what struck me, and it's as much the same as with British soldiers getting ready to go into action. There was a degree of apprehension because they know the real dangers they face, but there was absolutely no question about their commitment and their determination. And this is where one of the differences is between the IDF and, let's say, British forces in Afghanistan or Iraq or wherever, American forces. Yeah, they're very similar. The IDF wear a strange sort of green uniform, whereas we wear a camouflage uniform. And a lot of them, most of them, all of them speak with some strange in some strange language that I struggle to understand, although there are many Brits and Americans and others among them. But this is one of the big differences here, I think, is that these soldiers are fighting on their own doorstep. We were fighting thousands of miles from home. These are fighting on their own doorstep. They know what happened 3 weeks ago. They're absolutely committed to protecting their families, their friends, their countrymen, their land. And it was, for me, talking to them was very humbling, actually, as well as inspirational. I'm sure, knowing what I know of the IDF, I'm sure they will do an extraordinary job inside Gaza. And I have little doubt. I mean, it's going to be tough. We are going to see more casualties, but it's going to be, I think, ultimately a victory for the IDF, which is sorely needed now. And above all, I mean, I would go back to the issue of the hostages, which none of us should ever have out of our minds. Those poor people who are in tunnels or other buildings, monsters. What they can be thinking, I have no idea. I've been involved in hostage rescue situations in the past, but that's in Afghanistan and Iraq, and it's involved maybe 2-3 people in different incidents. Even that is immensely challenging. When you've got over 200, I don't even like to think about the challenges that are faced by the IDF in getting them out. But I think if any army in the world can rescue even some of those hostages, then I think it's the IDF. It's very, very evident from everything I've seen among the IDF soldiers I've met in recent days.
Let's just take a few comments from the folks listening right now. First, Moshe Herman, my friend and one of my producers and a close buddy of mine, says the jihad is at war with the West. When will we wake up? What do you say to that, Richard?
I think it's absolutely right, and it was the case before 9/11, and if 9/11 didn't make it obvious, then I don't know what would have done. But nevertheless, we did not wake up. Even if we woke up briefly, we've been back to sleep again. So I mean, the answer is I don't know the answer. I do know that we need to wake up, and as I said right at the beginning, this is not just Israel's fight. This is a fight for the whole of the civilized world, in which jihad and jihadists are ranged against us. And you saw it on the streets of London. You've seen it in the United States. These people want to change our society. They want to bring us down. And the spearhead is jihadists here in the Middle East, particularly those who are led and funded and armed by Iran. It is absolutely sickening to see the level of appeasement that we've seen, not just from the United States, not just from Obama and Biden, but also from the British governments and other European governments, who think that, I think Churchill's words were something like, if you feed the crocodile, maybe he will eat you last, something like that. That's an abbreviation of what he said. And that's the mentality that we face. And anyone can sit here and say, we've got to wake up, but I'm not sure I have the confidence that our leaders today will wake up and will deal with this problem.
I want to tell you, Colonel Kemp, that coincidentally, in the last few weeks before this attack, I have been reading a book called The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, right? It's a very famous book. And I was just at the chapters dealing with a Chamberlain and his appeasement of Hitler, specifically of the giveaway of Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland there. What I didn't know is how important the Sudetenland was. I knew there was a German population there, but I did not understand that there were massive defenses, fortress defenses and walls and a whole heap of defenses that were really good, the thing that could have stopped Hitler, and he was absolutely unable to defeat that. But he, through political machinations and through what the author describes as almost an obsessive need by Chamberlain to appease Hitler, that's the way he described it. Really, the war was given to great success to the Nazis to move forward with their effort to conquer all of Europe and to eradicate the Jews. So appeasement, is, in hindsight, it's absurd, it's ridiculous, but in the time you see that people do that. I mean, I must tell you that there are reports now of the few surviving female soldiers who were the video monitors. They were the information. They manned the monitors that made sure that they checked on what's happening on the other side. And they said, no, we've been reporting for months that they're training for a breakthrough right across from us. It's happening underneath our very nose. Okay, so you're talking about appeasement. I mean, we look the other way. We fund the jihad. We allow it to happen. We give them territory. The West sends money to them, etc., to Iran. It's like, my question to you is, I want to phrase it in a question is, where's the repentance going to be to come back to a policy of common sense?
I'm not sure there's going to be that repentance or even recognition, or certainly not admittance of the culpability here. But I think, my biggest fear on this, in this situation, my biggest hope is that by Israel smashing the hell out of Hamas and hopefully Hezbollah as well, this will give Iran, even if they only deal with Hamas, it will give Iran a bloody nose. And there's only one thing that deters people, and that's strength. Weakness provokes and encourages offensive and aggressive action. And my biggest concern is that the United States, Biden does not have a great track record in the foreign policy world. He doesn't have a great track record in supporting Israel either. Yes, what he's done, some of his speeches and his deployment of US forces has been a good thing. But I just wonder how long that will last, how long he will maintain the strength to back Israel in this fight before he wants to start putting more pressure on Netanyahu to back down and have some kind of accommodation, which is effectively, that is appeasing. It's appeasing Iran, and it's appeasing organizations like the United Nations, human rights councils, and human rights groups, and all of them, so much of the media that's ranged against Israel. These people, they're ripe to be appeased by Biden, and I just hope that he is able to have the strength to continue to allow Israel to do what it has to do. And if that doesn't happen, it's not just a catastrophe for Israel. It's a real catastrophe for the whole of the Western world.
So there's a lot on the line here, and according to your understanding, this is not just a small kind of little battle between a dissident group and Israel. I see that you're painting this in much more global and civilizational colors. Is that right?
Yeah, and even if you just take one aspect of it, which is, let's say, the rise of the Islamic State. When the Islamic State was in its heyday, in Syria and Iraq in particular, okay, the Islamic State still exists, but it's been largely smashed. It still exists. There are still elements in places like Afghanistan and the Middle East and elsewhere. But when it was in its heyday, it inspired so much terrorism. Jihadists from the UK and from other countries in Europe and other countries around the world went to fight with it, were inspired and encouraged by it, came back. Well trained, well prepared. The Islamic State and Al Qaeda as well encouraged attacks in our countries. We've seen some terrible terrorist attacks, even if you don't include 9/11. We've had some terrible terrorist attacks in the UK, in London, in Manchester, in other parts of the country, inspired by this jihadism. And if these jihadists here succeed and are not completely vanquished by Israel, then that will further inspire terrorism in all of our countries. And we've already seen it. We've already seen the beginnings of it in France and in Belgium. And no doubt there are plenty of others in other countries that have been at least disrupted by our intelligence and security services so far. But it won't be the end of them if Israel does not succeed here.
Very important point that you just made, which is the opposite of appeasement. Appeasement and losses, any kind of loss to the jihad, encourages them, inspires them, and they get wind in their sails from it, and they continue on and on. They want more.